And recording. And welcome to another episode of This American Negro. This American Negro is a podcast that's aimed to bridge academia and the hood because I don't think this information should live in an echo chamber. And I do think that information should be accessible to everybody. So this is my way to try and contribute to that. If you are new to this, my name is Marquise Richards, Marquise Davon on all social media. And I work in after school space, so I really try to focus on bringing hip hop education and entrepreneurship into the classroom, but also what happens after that through project-based learning and all that fun stuff. I'm also a social media strategist. I'm also a public speaker. So if you need me in any of these fields, feel free to reach out, all that fun stuff. I am in the Philadelphia area, but I am originally from Reading, Pennsylvania. I was born and raised there. Graduated from Susquehanna University, studying theater and broadcasting. So that's all the fun resume stuff out the way. But welcome, if not, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for still rocking with me after, it'll be a year next month. So that'll be cool. And there's different ways to support this podcast. If you do want to support me, you can follow me on patreon.com. So that's going to be patreon.com/thisamericannegro. And you can commit as little as $2 a month and as much as, I think I put like $20 a month. And it's a small commitment. I appreciate that if you want to do that. But if you want to do a one-time payment, you can also Cash App. So cashapp.com or whatever /$ Marquise Davon. Pretty much keep it simple. But we're in time of COVID. So if you cannot financially support this podcast, you can do the non-monetary ways to do so. So that is retweeting the podcast, letting us know when you're listening to it, liking and subscribing wherever you listen, leave a rate and review on Apple Podcasts, interact with me. That way, tell your friends about the podcast, tell a friend on how to listen to podcasts, because some people don't know how to listen to podcasts. So just started from there. And that's all the fun administrative stuff for this show. Other than that, just a quick recap. My last episode I had with Lorenzo. Thank you once again for coming on. It was a dope opportunity to talk about how to use Black art as a tool of liberation. So we got into a lot of different topics, from the Black Panthers to Beyonce's Lemonade formation performance in the 2016 Super Bowl. So it was a variety of stuff. So make sure to still follow him and keep listening to that episode. I was really excited about that interview. And that's all the cool recap stuff we got. And now it's time to get into this week. So this week for This American Negro, I will be highlighting one educator a day through just a series of different interviews. And I wanted to do this for Teachers Appreciation Week. So we're going to be talking about a culturally responsive classroom and what that looks like, Black girls in STEM, supporting Black educators in different ways, and a couple other topics from our guests. So you'll be able to see that layout coming very soon. And also something else to look forward to this week, I'll be hosting an Instagram live conversation with award-winning journalist Ernest Owens at 6:30. So please join us there. I'm excited to talk about what the state of journalism looks like during the Rona. So that's all the fun stuff, but enough about me. Let's get into this week's guest, who I'm so excited to have on the show. I started interacting with him on Twitter, and then just from there, it's been a cool back and forth. So I've been super excited to get you onto the podcast. I would love for you to introduce yourself, Mr. Madison Payton.
Well, I'd like to say first that you are very comprehensive. So that's also pretty good. So I won't be quite as comprehensive, but I'll give you a little bit about myself. My name is Madison Payton. I've been working for the Department of Education for about 8 years at Eagle Academy for Young Men, which is an all-boy public school in Brownsville, Brooklyn. I'm also a PhD candidate at NYU, where I focus on the school-to-prison pipeline.
Come on now.
So that's pretty much me in a nutshell, but I think that's enough for now.
For now, I think we're going to delve into some of the stuff too. I might ask you a couple questions about the school-to-prison pipeline, just throwing that in there, potentially. But first things first, can you tell us a little bit more about why you got into education? I just always want to start from there to see like different avenues on how people actually got into this space. Was this something you knew you always wanted to do, or did it just one day like, oh, I like this? Like,
yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting question. I think that I get asked that question all the time. And I think it came from middle school, where I started to kind of see things very differently. I had a cousin that went to a magnet school above me, and I realized that they had a lot more resources than my school. And I always questioned, why is this the case? Like, me and my cousin come from the same family. Why can't we have the same thing? So kind of seeing that a little bit, kind of getting into student government, challenging the system. I didn't know what I was doing.
Come
And I was like,
on.
you know what? It's something that just doesn't seem right. It doesn't feel right. Like, you don't know what you call it. You don't know that it's investing in whiteness and white supremacy. You don't know that education is really oppressive, at least back then. I mean, I think a lot of kids now know a lot more than we did growing up.
That's a fact.
So I didn't have anything to label it, but I was like, this seems wrong that we're just reading dead white authors. Or why do we have to walk in line in the hallway? Like, why, we're 16, 17 years old. Why do we have to be policed? So that experience really had me thinking about education in a meaningful way. But I didn't get into education right away. I went to college. I decided to kind of play the mixed card. And I was kind of always in the middle. I was your typical person of color that was like, I see both sides. And, maybe we need to talk about these things. Maybe we need to like do things a little bit better. Or, white people need help. Maybe we should tell them about what they're doing and things like that. So I was more of a sympathizer back in the day.
Right. And when did that switch kind of happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a mode of survival. Like, I went to a school in the middle of nowhere. I know you went to a school that was a PWI.
Yep, middle of nowhere.
Middle of nowhere. I mean, to be honest, and I'm going to try to be as honest as possible. I knew that at the time that I could, because of the color of my skin and the way that I was brought up in terms of my parents always made sure that I, quote, adapted to middle-class values, which we can get into a second of how that's problematic, right. But that's how we're raised. So I knew that I could always be on the fence because I knew I wasn't Black enough. I knew that I wasn't Hispanic enough, and I know that I wasn't white. And I learned early on that sometimes you had to maneuver and be a chameleon in the system,
right,
to make it work for you. And it's funny because I believed at that time that in order to beat the master, you have to use their tools.
Right.
Obviously, I learned that Audre Lorde said something, I'm paraphrasing, that you can never beat the master with his own tools. You have to make your own tools. And that is the way that you can beat it. So, here I am, like, I guess, trying to fit in and survivor mode. And then I started seeing that my nephew, who was now in high school, was being more on the punitive side of things. He was being punished for doing random things. He was being suspended. He was being pushed out of class. And that wasn't my experience because I always was like on the fence of stuff. But I started realizing that just didn't seem right. So years later, I decided to get into education because I knew how deeply impacted my nephew was during that situation. I knew that I felt guilty in a way, kind of how I was in college, where I was still with my Black people, but I also was still with white people, and I was kind of like in the middle a lot.
Right.
And that's something that I deeply regret because I didn't fully embrace being Black until I left Indiana. And I think that was sad. I think it was a missed opportunity. So I think I went through a period of mourning that experience. And then saying, you know what, I really need to dedicate my life through education, helping others that look like me, making sure that there won't be another student like my nephew. And there damn sure won't be anybody like me who definitely could be white leaning in terms of like thought and like continuing the oppressive factors and structures that exist, which I know now is not great. And I do apologize for that. But I think that's the privilege of being light-skinned sometimes, is that you can sometimes mesh whenever possible. And I think that's kind of where I was at.
Yeah, no, and I feel that, not on the light skin part, but definitely the ability to kind of navigate both spaces at the same time, especially at a PWI, because that's definitely where I remember that was my experience when I first got to college. I was just happy to be there, but I meshed really well with like all kinds of students, and that's just because it was still, I was still like not the militant black yet. It was definitely just one of those spaces where I was like, nah, I like having fun. I'm a smiley person, so people just gravitate towards personality. But then I realized when I was like, oh, they feel safe around me as opposed to the other black people, which was a very interesting dynamic. So I do appreciate you sharing that part of your story. So as you're going through this entire phase and you're starting to see these injustices and stuff, what role did you decide to take in the education space in particular? Did you decide to go immediately into the classroom? Are you outside of the classroom? How did you decide on how you wanted to make an impact in this space?
Well, I came in as a English language art teacher, and I already knew what I wanted to do. Yeah, English. I already knew what I wanted to do because I knew that I wanted to teach at this particular school that I'm in. I knew that I wanted to create my own curriculum. I knew that that school supported that. So I came in immediately teaching human rights through literature, and I completely like created everything, and I crashed a lot, and it was a beautiful thing. I always apologize to those kids. Like I was just trying to make up for lost time. So yeah. I just kind of like bombarded them with like everything possible, not really caring at first, like if they actually really got it, but I was just like, I just got to give them everything.
Right.
And with giving them everything, a lot of it stuck, a lot of it didn't. And I realized that, you know, there is a design to how we develop culturally relevant classrooms, and that there's a process, and a lot of that process is having you efface your own practices and your beliefs on education. And you have to really look about, where am I coming from? Where do I want to go? What are the limitations that I have as this particular person? I think that was the issue, because you look at certain brown and black students and you're like, oh, I grew up in the hood. I did all these similar, and you have similar stories. But what you don't realize is that it's a different story through a different time, and there are other factors that play into that. So you can look at a kid and just say, hey, you know, you need to work harder, and you need to not be lazy, and you need to, I did it so you can. And while those are all encouraging words, we also have to realize that we can't use our own experience our own experience on other students. And I think that that's where a lot of educators of color that I've seen or noticed, that they always use the rah, I did it, so can you. And I think that's great. But I also think that there are so many different variables that you need to consider before you say, oh, I did it, you can too.
Right. And can you lean into a little bit more, one, of the curriculum that you built, but then also how you tried to also do that as you design like this culturally relevant classroom?
Yeah, so I think the biggest part that a lot of people don't do, and I think that I started at the end of that first year, is listening to students. Like, all right, so here's the topic. What are the things that are the most salient to you? What are the things that make you tick? What are the things that don't make you tick? And I think really listening to students and really not being afraid to give students control in what they learn and how they learn. And I think a lot of educators fear that, because as we already know, there's not a lot of respect in the profession for terrible reasons. And the one place that we have the most control is not in the school, but in our classroom. So people really take that to the hilt. And what you see is a lot of militancy, and you see a lot of, I know best, so you follow models. And I think that is a grave mistake. So I think listening a lot more, seeing how you want to learn, is also very key. A lot of people think, especially ELA teachers, they think the one way you can only learn is through a book. And I disagree. I think students can learn from podcasts. They can learn from YouTube. They can learn from each other. Seeing students as experts and leveraging their own resources and having an asset-based pedagogy as opposed to a deficit-based pedagogy is something that we need to focus more on in education.
Right. And can you define those terms just in case some listeners are like, yeah, I'm new to this?
I mean, so asset-based is basically just taking what your community has and figuring out what are the things they have to offer. It's about coming into the space saying, hey, you are experts in many different areas, and I want to leverage your expertise in this particular space. I know that you can add value, so it's about us finding that value and leveraging that value to our advantage as a community. And a deficit model is basically saying what what people can't do and what they don't have and what we need to provide for them without asking. You see a lot of that with saviorism. You see a lot of that with a lot of policies, actually. Like, they use the statistics to make a policy or a practice, and they usually are negative statistics, right? 35% of Black boys don't graduate. What do we have to do? So it's not about they're not graduating, it's what are those boys experiencing to not allow them to graduate is the real question. Not about, oh, they failed themselves or we're failing them. We really have to get to the root of why they're not being successful. And a lot of times they're not being successful because they don't see success. They don't see themselves in school. Therefore, they have no reason to be there.
Wow. And so when we take that, all of that together, and really bringing in this kind of model into the classroom, have you seen students or even other teachers or parents even kind of be like, whoa, you're allowing my kid to have say into like what they're learning? Is there like a little bit of resistance that ever happened during that time? Or are students also just like, this is weird, you actually can't care about my opinion?
I mean, not so much on the student side. Students actually love to have their voice in stuff. They have more opinions than you actually need, but that's good. It overflows and it's a little bit overwhelming. The parents are a little bit different depending on where you're at. Some parents are like, cool. Some parents are like, okay, so what are you getting paid for? Because they have an old model of the way teaching should be. They use their own model of how they learned, and they say, well, you're supposed to be the expert. Why are you being paid when you're not even using your expertise? You're allowing my kid who doesn't know much, again, deficit thinking, my kid doesn't know much. They come to you, therefore, you're supposed to give them all the knowledge, which goes back to the whole banking system of knowledge. Like, teachers are meant to fill the vessel. And we know that in culturally relevant education, that's not the case, that students come already filled with plenty of knowledge, plenty of skills, and we have to figure out how can we illuminate the knowledge that they have? How can we illuminate the skills that they already have and really form a community where they see each other as valuable and that they see that they can actually grow, void of competition, void of people telling them what they need to learn so that they can be successful. Like, we have to stop setting kids up just to survive. We have to set kids to actually learn and thrive.
That's actually, I'm glad you said that, because as soon as you talked about like raising us in terms of like competition as well, it took me back to my AP World History teacher. And he was just like, no, you're each other's competition. You need to do better than this person in order to survive, in order to get jobs, in order to get into college. And I remember like a lot of us just thinking like that. I remember our class having like real good pushback and was just like, but why can't we just help each other succeed? Why is that the thing? I don't want to go to the same college as Joe Schmo over here. So you brought me back to that. And I was like, wow, I wish I would have had a little bit more of this when I was growing up. But something else you're alluding to is what a culturally relevant classroom is. So I feel like throughout this, you were kind of naming some of the tenets, some of the practices, but can you actually give more of a definition to what that is and how teachers can build a culturally relevant classroom?
Yes. So I think culturally relevant, they're calling it culturally relevant education because there's a lot of different models. The famous one is by Madison Billings, which is the culturally relevant culturally relevant pedagogy. And that's all about just kind of like being culturally competent, having a rigorous education, and really trying to be critical, using critical conscious, which comes from Paulo Freire, about being really critically conscious about your environment. Madison Billings actually said recently in the book Culturally Sustaining Pedagogy that she wished that people would listen more to being critical, because everybody's about the culturally competence and everybody's about the rigor and stuff like that. But people forget about part of it is being critical. And being critical is also naming whiteness and white supremacy, losing some of your privilege depending on where you are on the spectrum, and really dismantling the master's house, using your own tools not using their tools. Using their tools is standardized testing. Using their tools is pushing kids out. Using their tools is giving them dead white authors and talking all about Europe and yada, yada, yada. Those are their tools. And we have to get to a place where we're not just accommodating or adjusting. We have to completely get rid of it. We have to abolish all of those things and do exactly what Black folk have been doing in the South pre-Brown, where we had a lot of great education in the South. People forget about education actually was thriving. Short of them not having the resources, it was Black run, Black owned. Students were learning about their culture, their identity. Cultural relevancy actually comes from Latson Billings observing Black educators. So that's where her research is coming from. But also I would argue that if we were to go back into time before Brown v. Board, we would also see similar things with the with black schooling, with culturally relevant education and things like that. So I think that a lot of those practices come from us. And I think that we have to fully embrace educating the whole child, which is another lame term that people like to say. I'm using a holistic approach on this child. Yeah, but you just said that they can't use slang in your class, or you had them line up before they got into your class. That's oppressive. That's not culturally aligned to who we are as Black and brown folk.
Nah, and I think that part right there is like super critical, because that even just leans into a little bit more of getting into this school to prison pipeline conversation, and like how we're also like building out this culture around our students of just like, make sure you stay on the right side of the hallway. Make sure you line up before you get in my classroom. All right, you're not here on time. We're going to do some hall sweeps. And what that looks like, because I remember I used to be running, and our school, like Reading High, that joint was like a mile across. So you had stuff on the opposite side of the building, and then you got stuff on the other side, and they're just like, oh, you didn't get there in time. Now you got to go sit in ISS. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because I know this is more like in your PhD work, but really the school to prison pipeline and how we can start to break that tradition-ish system, I guess is a better word for it, in these schools, or different ways that administrators can say, hey, maybe this doesn't actually work because this is giving our students the wrong impression a little bit more.
So I appreciate your 2-for-1 special right now. But that's cool. They're actually very related, because a lot of times what we see, a lot of the behavioral stuff stems from the classroom. Teachers are hands down the most responsible for referrals for students to even get tangled up in detention, in the hands of SROs, going to juvenile detention centers. It's all the referrals that come from the classroom, because a lot of times students, especially students of color, are always penalized for subjective offenses and not objective offensive. Like tone is a big thing. Tone, talking back, not being positioned correctly in class. So the micromanagement of Black and brown bodies, the micromanagement of the languages that we use, as I like to call African-American vernacular, or we call it Black English, or we call it American Standard English. Excuse me, not that. Whoa, that's not that. I call standard dominant. See, I'm combining the two. Standard English is one of my biggest pet peeves, but I like to call it dominant American English, because that I think is more appropriate to when we're talking about that. Because I think that it's not a standard. Right. It's dominant and it's English, but it's not the right way. There's no right or wrong way to speak English, especially if we understand the history of language and literacy practices. There is no standard, but it's a white standard, and students are constantly pressed against or measured by white standards that we have here, white middle-class male standards for that, knowing that we will never measure up to a system that is designed to oppress us. Anyway, I think I kind of went. So all of that.
I appreciate it. You're good.
all of that contributes to the school to prison pipeline, because what's happening in the classroom or what's not happening to the classroom will determine how students are experiencing their learning, right? a lot of students are actually frustrated that they're frustrated by what they're learning. A lot of schools are in hostile environments. You go in, you're immediately sometimes greeted with SROs. You have caged windows. You have lining down the hall. You have to go from the first floor to the third floor in 2 minutes. Like, all of that is indicative of a prison-like system. And I think that that's what you see, and that's what you're going to get when you also don't consider the student and where they're at and where they would like to go. So I think that goes hand in hand with that. The teachers are very much responsible for how kids are referred to suspension, discipline, expulsion, detention, all of that. And we do know, because the profession is 80% white female, that also has an issue within itself.
Right. Nah, and I thank you a lot for breaking that down, but also meeting both of them worlds together. Because I think that's like super, super pivotal in this moment. So before we finish off a lot of this conversation and the meat and potatoes of conversation, can you give advice to some teachers who don't know where to start when it comes to culturally relevant education, and when you're going into the space and really trying to connect with your students, but also relinquishing a little bit of ego to say, hey, this is like a mutual back and forth. Like, I should be learning the same way you should be learning. So can you give us your top 3 tips on
I mean, it's a lot. I think they do this exercise when you become a teacher about like your educational philosophy, or they have you do a lot of critical reflections on like your teaching. Yeah. I think educators need to critically reflect on their positionality.
Yeah.
And their privilege, because I think they really have to understand themselves. And I think that part of being a teacher is unlearning the way you learned. So I think that a lot of the people who are teachers are, quote, the overachievers, the ones who follow the rules, who did all of the things that they needed to be successful. So in education, we have a lot of rule followers that, unfortunately, by following the rules, is supporting oppressive practices in education. Right. As I gave my story earlier, I was a rule follower. I did all the things. I pushed myself so that I can be successful. And I feel like there's a lot of rule followers, and we have to understand that the way we learn most likely was not the best way, and we have to completely go against that. That's number one. Really examining yourself and seeing like where, and this is what Black folk too, because I had to analyze myself. I said, you know what? I grew up in East Harlem, adjacent from projects in a 2-parent home that had 2 incomes.
Right.
So even that is a privilege within itself compared to someone who might have not had those things.
Right.
Understanding that was part of my process, that was part of my journey, and that because of an extra income, I could have a laptop sooner. I can like go on a trip. I can do these things that are not privy to certain students. So yes, I might look like a lot of my students, but when you start investigating what they have, what they can do, all of that environmental stuff, which again is not negative, but you have to limit yourself in identifying yourself with that person and all of that. It's a very fine line of how we kind of relate to students. Right. Oh, you grew up on that side of the street. I grew up on the other side of the street. 2 different lives. Right. 2 different experiences.
I just had that experience when I was going through this training for this summer residential program that I'm a part of. And it was fascinating to have to explain that to people who were like bringing the training to us. And I was really challenging them, because I was just like, no, like our students are much different. So like even coming into it, you can't just blatantly say like, oh yeah, we want to encourage all Black and brown students and they all go through the same basis of things. Like, no, a student who's going to be on Stanford's campus is going to be much different from the student who has to sit at UPenn and really still be in this Philly environment. So I thought it was like very fascinating, even when they tried to talk about, no, this curriculum works for every Black and brown student. And we were just like, does it though? And that was like an interesting moment, because they were just like, they referred back to, oh, we're in like a growth mindset environment or some bullshit to cop out. But I was just like, no, just challenge and go back and like see how you can build this. So I do appreciate that extra point that you threw in there about.
Let me tell you how much I hate growth mindset. First of all, it is the way growth mindset is used in a way to not acknowledge that students are actually resilient, that students can actually grow, and that students have the ability to do all those things. So when an educator says, oh, you have to practice a good mindset, or you have to have more grit or be resilient, a lot of students that I teach are in trauma-based environments. Like the fact that that student made it to my class without being heard or any sort of thing is showing actually a lot of grit. So you hear all of these like neoliberal terms, like we have to teach our kids how to like think about things positively. You know what? Being poor is not a positive thing. Not having to eat is not a positive thing. There are a lot of things that students don't have control over. And you know what? It's okay. And I don't know how many it is, but I know that I have the ability to do so. And a lot of times when people use growth mindset, it's usually talking down to people. And also, it's all this myth about meritocracy. Oh, if you work hard and you go to, you push yourself to do what you want to do, you can do anything, which is not true. You can reach certain heights, but you still are Black. You are still an immigrant. You still use slang, and you still all the things that they don't want, but they want to use for their advantage. They want to make money off of your skin, your style, all of that, but they don't want to include you in any of that. So we have to be very careful, and I hate when people use that sort of language because it completely uses a deficit model sometimes where kids are more resilient than the white folk that's telling them that, oh, honey, you need to be more resilient. You grew up in the middle of nowhere, had money, and you went to Yale University. How is that resilient? You know nothing about resilient. You know what's resilient? Me taking care of my siblings, me working on the weekends so I can put food on the table, me making it to school. That's resilience. So how are you going to tell me about resiliency when you've never even had to experience any of the trauma that I've gone through?
Right.
I think that's kind of like, that's what you see a lot of, that kind of talking down to students and not really realizing that you don't know what you're talking about. And this goes for upper middle class Black folk too, because they are completely have drank the Kool-Aid sometimes and forget who they are and where they came from.
And look, that's a conversation in itself, because I never realized until I got to school, like that was a thing. And I said, oh, they are not in tune. Like for me, I grew up in a single parent household in Reading, PA, and went to a public school of 4,000 plus students. So I'm saying, I'm just like, oh, this is interesting. And so like, I'm the only one out of my siblings, I'm the middle of five, and I'm the only one to have went to college. And so it was like a very interesting thing when people are just like, well, wait, how come your experience was different from the rest of your siblings? I'm just like, well, I had a sister who was taking care of some of her brothers. She was the oldest. My older brother was doing the exact same thing. I had the opportunity because they had to sacrifice a little bit of their stuff. My two little brothers, they ended up getting into their own stuff. So I'm just like, it's very interesting when you see like these 5 kids who went to the same school, same house. Only one of them graduated high school and went to college. Like, that's the part where I think sometimes they're just like, well, how'd you do it? And I was like, don't think it was easy either, because I worked at McDonald's, still taking all AP courses, and then on top of that, I wanted to still do school shows. So that's late night rehearsals in between getting classes, also sleeping all the time in classes. But I was still a straight A student, so we're out here. But it was still just like that thing where I was like, no, education is my way out. But if it wasn't for my siblings, then they found their own way to figure it out. So I think like that whole idea of resiliency and teachers saying, oh, well, you should be able to do this. No, I want to be participating in school, but I'm dead tired because of the 50 other million things I have to do to make sure I get here the next day and make sure I get a hot meal at that point. So I think that's also like just a reality when it comes to these different schools and different situations. Yeah. And rant. Oh, my soapbox. We out. But yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, I think I had like another one
Yeah,
because I think I only named one or two. I don't know. I got in
I
a
think you
rant.
only named two, to be honest.
Listen to your students and not be afraid to give them control. And
Mhm.
when I mean control, you can start off with gradualism. You can say, okay, 70% is me, 30% is them.
Right,
And then the next year, 50% is me, 50% is them. Where I'm at now, I'm at 15% me and the
right,
rest them. So I think that that is where we need to go. I think it's between the 15 to 25% range is
right.
where we need to have students and teachers.
I
But
like that a lot.
it takes time.
Right,
Trust me, and it's very hard because you're giving up a lot. Giving up a lot could mean a disastrous classroom management. It could mean disorganization. It could mean just a mess. But you have to be willing to take that risk because you know what? At least there could be some sort of engagement where they actually can learn more through this process than for them to learn about things that don't even matter to them, if they're
right.
even learning at all.
No, I feel that there. That is, woo, a fact and a half.
Act and a half.
No, I appreciate that. I really appreciate this conversation because it's a cool way to like break down, especially what you've been practicing and really just getting to know you as well. Because I do think like through this too is like an opportunity to start also humanizing teachers at the same time and people in the education space. Because sometimes, well, now y'all realize how important teachers are now, right? So really just kind of figure out like what that is. And so I think the part where I'm going to humanize you now is you wasn't ready for this. So I didn't tell you what was happening. But outside of all that fun jargon, let's get to know a little bit more about Madison on a real low key base. So I'm going to give you like 5 random questions
Okay,
and then just kind of go from there. Cool?
perfect.
All right. So first things first, if you were not in the education space, what would you want to be?
If I was not in the education space, I would be a lawyer,
Word?
and specifically public interest law.
I'm nice with that. I can see that. I'm here for that. Favorite color?
My favorite color is gray.
Okay. Okay. Can we talk about that hat real quick? Where'd you get
Yeah,
that?
I mean, it took 3 weeks to get here because Amazon Prime's not Amazon Prime anymore.
Not anymore.
But it was worth the 3 week wait. So
I like that a lot. I bangs with that. It's a hat that says Kings of New York with a crown over the eye. That was fire.
a Basquiat crown.
Basquiat crown in particular, so don't get that twisted either.
Exactly. Like we gotta give my man Basquiat some credit.
Look, that I got words on that. That's another conversation for another day. So the next question is, what are you currently watching on TV?
Oh boy. I just finished watching Little Fires Everywhere. It was one of my guilty pleasures. A
So
lot of
good.
people would not even expect me to watch that, but I sat there and watched every single episode in one day.
You did it in one sitting?
Did it in one sitting.
Oh my gosh. And I sat there and I wish I would have did that instead because I was just doing the week to week and I was just like, I just want this all at once.
I like to binge my watch. That's why I can't do Insecure because I will sit 3 days to watch all of it.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense now. That makes more sense. I got you. I'm here for that. I can appreciate that. What's that? Question number 3? Question number 3? All right. Question number 4. What songs are getting you by right now?
Ooh. What songs are getting me? I mean, anything. I mean, what got me by this morning was Tracy Chapman because I needed to kind of mellow out a little bit. I was trying to get in touch with some of my writing, so I needed that harmonizing, flow of things.
Thanks with that.
Yeah, Tracy Chapman, Fast Car,
Yep.
The Promise. So some good stuff. I like some bop. I depend so much on my students to keep me abreast to like the good stuff. I know that I hate the and Megan
Meg?
Thee Stallion. I know I'm gonna get killed for saying that.
Not on this podcast. They know this is a Beyonce Stan podcast. Oh no.
I mean, I think Beyonce still doesn't know what an OnlyFans is. The person who wrote it probably does.
Whoa.
And you never sent me your evidence of like her writing stuff. So
I knew. All right, say less. I got you. Come on. She had number ones. She wrote Survivor. She wrote Independent Woman. All right. Don't try.
Was that a decade ago? I mean,
because then you can even just talk about she wrote Partition. Okay, she got ready.
I think that's still a decade ago.
That is not a decade ago. Okay, that is 6 years. That was 2014. 2014. See, put some respect on her name. All right.
I did that on purpose since you want to ask me 5 random questions.
What'd you say?
I did that on purpose because you wanted to ask me 5 random questions.
You win this. So. You got that one. I appreciate that's petty with a purpose. I have to stand. And the last question is, what are you currently drinking?
I am drinking some oolong tea. I'm very big into teas, and I'm trying to learn more about teas. I'm in herbs because I think that I might start an online tea business for fun. That's how much I love tea.
I'm amazed with that. Let me know when I can support that.
Yeah, I'll let you know. And while we're here, I have a new podcast coming out called Racing Through Education. It will drop mid-June. It's with me and my colleague from NYU, Fazia Kadir. And we are going to be examining a lot of the same issues that we are talking here about race and education, how that impacts Black and brown folk in America. So hopefully you will all be ready to listen and tune in. And big shout out to Marquise because he's been very instrumental to helping us with that. And we hope that we share some of your listeners on our side of on our side of things. And I hope you edit some of this.
You're perfectly fine.
You better not just lay this out the way it happened today. You better do a little something.
A little here and there. I'll spice it up a little bit.
Tweak it just a little bit. I know you like to do the podcast as natural as possible. Mm-hmm. But I require a little bit of a touching up.
I'll do a little bit touching up for you. Just
a little bit.
No, but in all seriousness, I'm so glad we got to sit down and have this conversation. I'm looking forward to many more. I'm looking forward to your podcast coming out because I think that is going to be super instrumental, especially as we have to figure out like what does education look like post-COVID, because a lot of these are being exacerbated right now in terms of the education space. So I thank you for the work that you do. I thank you for the challenges that you present with other people. I appreciate just you as a being, and I'll continue to interact with you on Twitter until we can actually meet, in real life, face-to-face kind of thing. Like that.
Yeah. So, after COVID, of course. I go to Philly all the time, so
we got
to link up, get some Philly cheesesteak, walk around.
Look, I got you. I got the spots. I got you.
Perfect.
That's a fact.
On that note, I'm going to take a 20-minute nap before I have my work meeting. So thanks for having me, and I hope to continue to see your success.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Keep being great. Get your power nap in.
Thank you.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.